what the fuck did
polarity buttons
actually do? Because I don't think they're
being useful
on the spot. I think they make it.
to Soothe2 Delta.
So what
other functions
are they
adding?
What are the buttons doing? Is it a volume dial? Is it even
useful
to anything?
Hello and welcome everyone. This video is about polarity flips versus delta buttons. Because I noticed one thing lately, which is that most plugins don't even have polarity flip features anymore, but just delta buttons. And that made me wonder, are delta buttons generally superior to polarity flips, or do you still need them in some plugins? So let's look at some examples. Here we have some vocal chops. And if I load Kotelnikov as a compressor, I can compress them a little bit. And then I can use the delta button in order to only hear the difference between the wet and the dry signal. That's a very useful feature because it shows me exactly what the compressor is doing. It's basically a null test that you can do within the plugin so that you don't have to do it with complex routing outside of the plugin. I could show you the alternative. Let's make a layer, put it inside and load a utility plugin like Brainworx tool, flip the polarity here. As you can see, that is a delta feature as well, but you know, in some DAWs or like in most DAWs, it's pretty complicated to make a layer of things. So it's good when the feature is directly in the plugin, especially with compressors. Before we go on to the next plugin, let's examine a little bit further what's going on here. When I press delta, 3 of the plugin parameters get grayed out. I can still move them though, so let's see what they are doing. So makeup just makes it louder or quieter. And out gain as well, even though those are two different things. This is basically wet gain and this is output gain. Now let's also add the dry signal. And it's still the same. Make up and out gain do the same thing in delta mode, but we don't hear a difference when dialing in the dry mix because, well, there is no dry signal when you are only listening to the difference between wet and dry, obviously, because what would the dry signal be then? So that makes a lot of sense. Now the next thing I want to look at is how the delta is being implemented here in Soothe2. So let's process the signal a little bit. So here in Soothe2, because it's a very subtle effect in most cases, you can sometimes feel like, I don't know what I'm even doing. And in those cases, you can just activate delta and then you only hear to the difference in sound. And the workflow basically works a little bit like this. You then just start to tweak these filters and just try to find out where is the most annoying sound and you try to produce this annoying sound. So let's just say that these two frequencies are really annoying. I don't think they are so annoying, but I don't know. I don't have a better example now. And then we can deactivate delta again and we hear the signal where these annoying frequencies are like taken care of. And then you can A/B compare with bypass. That makes a lot of sense to me. So let's activate delta again and examine what's going on a little bit further. Because one of the key differences between Soothe2 and Kotelnikov in regard to the delta button is that there is a mix knob here that mixes the dry and the wet signal. So we could be wondering what happens if we turn down mix while delta is activated. And this is what happens. We just get total silence. So it's a bit of a similar behavior as in Kotelnikov, where basically the dry signal just doesn't exist anymore. So you could see the mix level as sort of just a gain parameter for your output. If you ever plan to, you know, just use the delta signal by itself, maybe for sound design purposes, then mix can be the gain knob. So next up we have the drums and bass group. And on a group like this, it can sometimes make sense to load a limiter like Pro L2. So let's dial in some limiting. And now you might be wondering what's even the difference. So there is a delta button here as well. It looks like this. I find it a little bit harder to judge what I should be doing in this plugin with the delta parameter, because I don't know really what it would sound like to have, you know, the opposite of what the limiter should do. It's a little bit less clear than what the delta button does in Soothe2, even though it's technically the same thing. But let's just listen to it without delta now. Yeah, I think it does sound a little bit better, even though I can't really be sure because it's subtle. Okay, so now let's just listen to the bass without anything else. And on the bass, I will now use BX Console. And if you're wondering, why do I have such an expensive plugin and never made a video about it? Well, the first reason is I bought it when it was massively on sale. I don't know, 20 euro or something like that. So it wasn't really a big deal. Secondly, I was curious because I wanted to find out, you know, all of these people who always say that it's just a different feeling to turn knobs for EQing instead of shifting blobs around on an XY pad like in ProQ, and it would lead to different results. And I wanted to find out if it's the same for me, if I can find any fascination in that. It turned out that it did not really fascinate me. Maybe I just haven't used it enough yet. But what turns me off most about it is that a lot of these parameters are just, the labels are not very understandable, and it's not quite clear what the signal chain is like as well. So I don't know how to use that without putting a lot of effort into reading the manual or watching a lot of videos and stuff like that. However, there is one thing in here that I do understand, which is that there is a polarity flip button. And I'm not sure how to use it actually. I mean, what's the purpose here? So let's just try to come up with a good EQ curve or something. Okay, I like this EQ curve, I think. It's not something that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish with ProQ, but I got it with this plugin now, and I pressed the polarity flip. Now, I don't see really what's the point of the polarity flip here. Like, you can't really use it in the plugin itself. It doesn't even have a dry wet mix parameter, so you can't use it like to make a null test or something like that. You can basically just use it in conjunction with some outside layering. As I said before, it can be really complicated to set up parallel processing, so this is very discouraged. Gladly, I'm using Bitwig where it's easy. So now we have a parallel processing setup with a dry signal and with a BX Console plugin, and it sounds like this. So this is the difference between the EQ'd part of the signal and the non-EQ'd part of the signal. Gotta say, you have to take this with a grain of salt, because if you load BX Console without changing anything and then polarity flip, it also has a sound. Because of the randomness that is introduced by TMT inside, and you can't even turn off analog mode to get rid of that. So yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on there. Maybe something with the compressors or whatever. You can't really cancel out this plugin with the polarity flip. So I'm wondering, what is the purpose of the polarity flip here? No idea. You've now seen a few examples of plugins where there are delta buttons, and in all of them they were kind of useful. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but always useful. And you've seen an example of a plugin where at least I didn't think the polarity flip was very useful. So this brings up the question, can polarity flips ever be useful? I asked around in a lot of Discord groups and finally got an answer from someone that was really brilliant. Actually, it was pretty simple, but still I didn't come up with it myself. So now we have this part. I was told I should try simply a flanger with a polarity flip feature. So I did that because I have native instruments Flair, and I show you what I did when I tested this. Turn up the mix so that I can hear the effect very nicely. Turn up the rate, turn down the amount so that I can, you know, come up with a good pitch. Turn up a lot of feedback. Then I dialed in the voices thing because I like when it codifies stuff. Turned in a little bit of damping to make it sound just nicer. And then you have to tweak the rate and the amount a little bit, and maybe even the width, to just get it sound a little bit more pleasant. So now I have a sound that adds some nice shiny tone to the original sound, and I can press on the polarity flip button and it does this. and it immediately sounds so much more chill. Now when you are using an FX layer and you have the dry signal and then you put the flanged 100% signal over it and experiment with the polarity flip button, it's like this. Now obviously that's the same as just turning down the mix to some value, but I like to use FX layer for that so that I can use, different effects behind and before the instance of the flanger or the dry signal. So I think we can conclude from this that delta buttons are usually more useful than polarity flips, because most of the time when people use polarity flips, they just use them to null out a signal with some other signal, most often dry with wet, in order to find out what's the difference, what has even changed by the effect, simply as an A/B compare tool. But in a case like this, where you can really shape the sound with the polarity flip, the polarity flip is actually much better than a delta feature.
Wait, that's not right. I made a big mistake when I recorded the initial video. So from now on, I will play back what I recorded after that, because I found out that the polarity flip in Flair is not a real polarity flip, which brings up new questions.
But then I was reminded that the polarity flip of this plugin, or flangers and delays in general, is rarely applied to the entire wet signal, but it's just flipping the polarity of the feedback gain inside of the delay. It is just portrayed like a global polarity by being next to the mix knob, which makes it a nice workflow of course, but technically this still doesn't prove anything. And I can show you that if I now make my own polarity flip on the wet signal and don't use the polarity flip here, then it sounds like this compared to the thing that we had before, which obviously sounds much nicer. The reason why it sounds so nice is because when you have the polarity flip in the delay feedback path itself, it just flips the signal back and forth between polarity flipped and unflipped with each repetition of the delay. It cancels out a lot of stuff, which makes it a lot softer and less resonant. Hence, the question is still open if polarity flips applied globally to the wet signal of the plugin are ever a better feature than a delta button. If you know a plugin where that is the case, then let me know in the comments. Also let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of the other stuff that I said in this video, like a use case for BX Console's polarity flip that I just didn't see because I'm not a target group, or a perspective on polarity flips or delta buttons that I haven't mentioned in the video yet, or maybe you're even thinking about an entire plugin type that I wasn't even covering in this whole video that has polarity flips or delta buttons where it just has a slightly different musical function than in the examples that I showed. Let me know if you use polarity flips or delta buttons in plugins. In which cases do you really enjoy them, or do you find them more to be a stressful thing because it clutters up the UI a little bit, or anything else that you are thinking of. See you next time.